Equals for the last 30 years, I have been paid to guard a single gravestone. For the last 30 years, I have been paid to guard a single gravestone. The arrangement began in 1993, when I was 25 and desperately needed work. My father had just died, leaving behind mounting medical debts that threatened to consume what little inheritance remained. I'd been scanning the classified ads in the local paper when I found it, a peculiar listing buried between offers for house cleaning and lawn care. Groundskeeper wanted. Long-term position. Excellent compensation. Discretion required. Contact Blackwood and Associates. The law office occupied the second floor of a Victorian building downtown, its windows perpetually shrouded by heavy curtains. Mr. Blackwood himself was an elderly gentleman with silver hair and eyes like winter mornings, pale and somehow distant. He explained the position with clinical precision. "You will be responsible for maintaining and protecting a single grave in Millbrook Cemetery," he said, sliding a contract across his mahogany desk. "The pay is substantial, as you can see. $5,000 monthly, with annual increases." I nearly choked. In 1993, that was more money than I'd ever dreamed of earning. Just one grave. Just one. Plot 47B, in the older section. "You'll keep the grass trimmed, the stone clean, and..." He paused, fixing me with those unsettling eyes. "You'll ensure no one disturbs it. Under any circumstances." The contract was unlike anything I'd seen. 30 pages of dense legal text, with clauses about confidentiality, liability, and something called containment protocols that weren't clearly defined. But the salary figure remained constant throughout, along with a termination clause that made my blood run cold. Breaking the contract would result in forfeiture of all wages and potential criminal charges. "What's buried there?" I asked. Mr. Blackwood's smile was thin as paper. "Someone who needs to stay buried, Mr. Harrison." I should have walked away. Instead, I signed my name on the final page. Plot 47B sat in the cemetery's oldest section, where weathered headstones tilted at odd angles and moss claimed more territory each year. The grave I was hired to guard stood apart from the others, surrounded by a small wrought iron fence that had been painted black so many times it seemed to absorb light. The headstone was simple granite, bearing only a name, Eleanor Marsh, and dates spanning from 1891 to 1924. What struck me immediately was the ground itself. While every other grave in the section showed the natural settling of decades, Plot 47B remained perfectly level, as if the earth beneath refused to sink. The grass grew differently too, staying unnaturally green even during the harshest winters, though it never seemed to grow tall enough to require cutting. My duties, as outlined in a separate manual delivered to my apartment, were straightforward. Visit the grave daily. Keep the headstone clean. Ensure the iron fence remained intact and properly latched. Report any disturbances immediately to Blackwood and Associates. Most importantly, and this was emphasized in bold, underlined text, never allow anyone to dig near or tamper with the grave itself. The first few years passed without incident. I developed a routine, visiting each morning with cleaning supplies and a thermos of coffee. The cemetery's other groundskeepers nodded politely but kept their distance. When I asked the head groundskeeper about Plot 47B, his expression grew troubled. "Been special attention on that one since before my time," he said. "My predecessor told me it's been watched for 40 years, maybe longer. Different men, same job. You're just the latest." That revelation sent a chill through me, but the monthly deposits continued arriving in my bank account like clockwork. I bought a small house, paid off my father's debts, and settled into what seemed like the world's easiest job. The first disturbance came in year 3. I arrived that Tuesday morning to find the fence gate standing open. Nothing else appeared touched. The headstone remained clean, the ground level and undisturbed, but the gate's latch showed scratches, as if someone had worked at it with tools. I called Blackwood and Associates immediately. Within an hour, 3 men in dark suits arrived. They examined the fence with scientific precision, taking photographs and measurements. One of them, a thin man with nervous eyes, produced what looked like a Geiger counter and swept it over the entire plot. "The readings are stable," he reported to his colleagues. "No breach detected." They replaced the fence with an identical version, but I noticed this one had a different latch, something more complex, requiring a specific key that Mr. Blackwood provided me later that afternoon. "Has this happened before?" I asked. "Occasionally," he replied, but offered no further explanation. Over the following years, the disturbances increased in frequency and boldness. I'd arrived to find the grass around the plot disturbed, as if people had been walking in circles around it. Once, I discovered a collection of strange symbols chalked onto the headstone, not quite letters, but something that hurt to look at directly. Another time, someone had driven metal stakes into the ground around the grave's perimeter, connected by what appeared to be copper wire. Each incident brought the same response: the men in suits, their careful examinations, their cryptic discussions about readings and containment integrity. They always seemed relieved when their instruments showed normal results, as if they'd been expecting something far worse. I began researching Eleanor Marsh during my free time. The local historical society had little information. She'd been born to a farming family outside town, never married, and died young under circumstances the records described only as sudden and unexplained. The newspaper archives were more interesting. Her death had warranted a front-page story in 1924, though the details were frustratingly vague. Woman dies in mysterious circumstances. Local resident Eleanor Marsh was found deceased in her home Tuesday morning by concerned neighbors. Sheriff's Department reports that Miss Marsh appeared to have died in her sleep, though the condition of the resident suggested some form of struggle had taken place. Dr. Henderson, who examined the body, declined to speculate on cause of death pending further investigation. I could find no follow-up articles. It was as if the story had simply been forgotten, or perhaps deliberately buried. The really disturbing incidents began around year 10. I started finding dead animals around the plot. Not roadkill or natural deaths, these were arranged, positioned deliberately around the fence in patterns that suggested ritual significance. Cats, mostly, but sometimes raccoons or possums, all drained of blood and placed at specific intervals. The men in suits would arrive, document everything, and remove the carcasses with clinical efficiency. "Someone's trying to feed it," I overheard one of them say during a particularly bad week when I'd found animals 3 days in a row. "Feed what?" I demanded, but they'd already noticed my presence and fell silent. Mr. Blackwood was aging visibly by then, his silver hair gone white and his winter eyes growing more distant each year. When I pressed him for answers about what was really buried in Plot 47B, his response was always the same: "Someone who needs to stay buried, Mr. Harrison. That's all you need to know." But I was beginning to suspect it wasn't someone. It was something. Year 15 brought the first direct attempt at excavation. I arrived that October morning to find the plot surrounded by police cars and crime scene tape. Someone had tried to dig, using professional equipment judging by the precise cuts in the earth around the grave's perimeter. They'd managed to go down perhaps 2 feet before apparently abandoning their efforts. Detective Martinez, who was handling the case, showed me photographs of what they'd found in the abandoned hole: strange growths that looked like roots, but moved with a life of their own. Black, pulsing things that seemed to reach upward toward the surface. "Ever seen anything like that before?" he asked. I lied and said no, though the sight of those photographs made my stomach turn. The way those root things seemed to writhe even in still images, the way they appeared to have tiny mouths along their lengths, opening and closing in silent hunger. The men in suits arrived faster than usual that day, bringing equipment I'd never seen before. They worked through the night, welding metal plates over the attempted excavation site and pouring what looked like concrete mixed with metal shavings over everything. By morning, the plot looked normal again, but I could swear I heard something underneath, a sound like distant scratching, as if something was trying to claw its way up through layers of earth and concrete. The payments increased after that incident. 10,000 monthly, then 15. Mr. Blackwood's explanations grew more elaborate, involving containment specialists and environmental hazards and government oversight. But his eyes held a fear that hadn't been there in the early years, and I noticed he no longer met my gaze directly when discussing the grave. Year 20 brought my first glimpse of Eleanor Marsh herself. I'd been working late, cleaning graffiti that someone had spray-painted across the headstone, when I saw movement in my peripheral vision. A woman stood about 30 feet away, partially obscured by an ancient oak tree. She wore a white dress that seemed to move in wind I couldn't feel, and her long dark hair framed a face that was somehow wrong, too pale, with shadows where her eyes should have been. She watched me work for perhaps 10 minutes, never moving, never speaking. When I finally worked up the courage to look directly at her, she was gone. But the temperature around the grave had dropped noticeably, and frost was forming on the grass despite the mild October weather. After that, I saw her regularly. Never during daylight, always at dusk or just after dark. She never came close to the grave itself, but her presence felt like a weight pressing down on the entire cemetery section. Other visitors began avoiding the area completely. Even the cemetery's groundskeeping crew started assigning the oldest section to their newest employees, and those employees never lasted long. "Something's not right over there," one of them told me after quitting his third day on the job. "It feels like being watched. Like something's waiting." He wasn't wrong. Eleanor, or whatever wore her appearance, was definitely waiting for something. The question that kept me awake at night was, waiting for what? Year 25 brought the revelation that changed everything. Mr. Blackwood died that spring, and his replacement was a younger man named Davidson who believed in full disclosure. He invited me to his office and laid out files that Blackwood had kept locked away for decades. Eleanor Marsh hadn't died of natural causes. She'd been executed, buried alive in 1924 by a group of townspeople who believed she was responsible for a series of disappearances that had plagued the area. The newspapers had covered up the real story, printing sanitized accounts to avoid panic. But the disappearances hadn't stopped with Eleanor's death. They'd gotten worse. The townspeople realized they'd made a mistake, Davidson explained, reading from a handwritten account that looked nearly a century old. Eleanor wasn't causing the disappearances. She'd been trying to prevent them. There was something else, something that had been feeding on the town for generations. Eleanor had found a way to contain it, but when they killed her. He didn't finish the sentence, but the implications were clear. Eleanor's death had released something far worse than anything she might have done. The files contained dozens of incident reports spanning decades. Disappearances, unexplained deaths, and increasingly desperate attempts to reinforce whatever containment Eleanor had originally established. The grave wasn't just Eleanor's resting place, it was a prison, and she was the only thing keeping its occupant from breaking free. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Davidson's expression was grim. "Because the containment is failing. Our specialists estimate we have perhaps 5 years before complete structural breakdown. We need to make preparations for alternative measures." He outlined a new contract that made my blood run cold. The pay would double again, but my responsibilities would expand significantly. I would need to undergo training in emergency containment protocols. I would be given access to specialized equipment and a direct line to government agencies I'd never heard of. Most disturbing of all, I would be authorized to use any means necessary to prevent containment failure. "What exactly am I containing?" I demanded. Davidson opened another file, this one filled with photographs that made the root-like growth seem benign by comparison. Images of something that defied description, part plant, part animal, part something else entirely. Something that existed in too many dimensions, with appendages that seemed to bend through space in ways that hurt to contemplate. "We call it the hunger," he said simply. "It's been feeding on this area for centuries, possibly longer. Eleanor somehow learned to control it, to keep it dormant. But it's been growing stronger since her death, and her ability to maintain the containment from beyond the grave is diminishing." The new contract came with a termination date, 5 years. After that, I would be relocated far from the area with a new identity and enough money to live comfortably anywhere in the world. The implication was clear: in 5 years, there might not be an area left to relocate from. I signed the contract because I didn't see an alternative. But also because, after 25 years of guarding Eleanor's grave, I felt responsible for whatever might happen if I walked away. The final 5 years have been a slow descent into nightmare. The disturbances now come daily. I arrive each morning to find evidence of increasingly desperate attempts to breach the containment, holes dug and abandoned, strange devices left around the perimeter, symbols carved into trees and nearby headstones. The men in suits have been replaced by military personnel who speak in code and carry weapons I don't recognize. Eleanor appears more frequently now, and she's no longer content to simply watch from a distance. She's tried to communicate, mouthing words I can't hear, pointing toward the grave with expressions of growing urgency. The shadows around her eyes have deepened, and sometimes I can see through her to the trees behind, as if her presence in this world is becoming tenuous. The ground around Plot 47B has started to pulse. Subtly at first, a barely perceptible rise and fall, like slow breathing. But it's become more pronounced with each passing month. The concrete and metal plating installed after the excavation attempt has begun to crack, and something dark seeps up through the fissures during heavy rains. 3 months ago, I started hearing voices coming from beneath the grave. Whispers at first, then distinct words in languages I don't recognize. Last week, I heard my own name being called from underground, spoken in a voice that sounded like every person who'd ever disappeared in this town, speaking in unison. The military personnel have begun preparing for something they call Final Protocol. They won't explain what it involves, but I've seen them bringing in equipment that looks designed for complete incineration of the area. Not just the grave, the entire cemetery section, possibly more. My contract expires in 2 weeks. They've arranged everything for my relocation to a small town in Oregon, complete with a new identity and a bank account that will keep me comfortable for life. All I have to do is walk away and never look back. But Eleanor's communications have become more desperate. Yesterday, she managed to approach within 10 feet of the grave before some invisible force pushed her back. The look of terror on her deteriorating face was unmistakable, and when she mouthed words at me, I finally understood what she'd been trying to say all these years. Don't let them burn it. I think I understand now. The military's final protocol isn't meant to destroy what's buried in Plot 47B. It's meant to free it. Fire won't kill the hunger, it will only eliminate the last vestiges of Eleanor's containment, allowing the thing she's been holding back to finally emerge into our world. Someone has been orchestrating this from the beginning. The increasing disturbances, the escalating attempts at excavation, even my hiring, it's all been designed to gradually weaken Eleanor's hold until the final protocol can be justified and implemented. In 2 weeks, I'm supposed to pack my belongings and drive to Oregon. The military team will arrive 6 hours after my departure to begin the final protocol. By the time the sun sets that day, everything within a 10-mile radius of Plot 47B will be ash and ruins. And something that has been hungry for over a century will finally be free to feed. I've been paid very well to guard a single gravestone for 30 years. But I'm beginning to understand that I haven't been guarding it from the outside world. I've been guarding the outside world from what lies beneath.